all, good morning. Hope all of you are doing well. Your family is safe and healthy during these extraordinary times. I say extraordinary because it is making us all think differently and things that we don't generally think about. Those are things that we are trying to operate under very different trying circumstances. And so these extraordinary times are going to challenge everyone's viewpoint. My name is Ram Ramachandran. I'm a professor of practice and vice dean at the Jindal School of Banking and Finance at OP Jindal Global University. I teach a variety of subjects from emerging technology and artificial intelligence to entrepreneurship, effective business communication, and project management. My research are in the areas of use of exponential technologies in different industries, financial services, retail industry, education, etc. I took a slightly different path to coming to academics. I spent about 35 years in the corporate sector, mostly working in New York and London, and I moved to India last year. I used to work for big four companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, EY, Bearing Point, etc. Primarily supporting many of the Wall Street firms like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citi, and Barclays in London, etc. Primarily helping them with their digital transformation agenda and helping them with their customer transformation programs and such. Most recently, before I joined Jindal, I was a managing director at EY in New York, driving their digital analytics and robotic process automation practices. I'm an engineer by educational training. I did my MBA and I'm currently pursuing my PhD. So the way we are going to do today is I'm going to spend probably the first 15 to 20 minutes or so talking about how FinTech is going to impact not just the business, but also your career in terms of how that is going to evolve over a period of time. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. And I do look forward to talking to you and conversing with you with your questions. And so please keep it coming. Okay. So let me first say that I see these crises as very important and meaningful opportunities. Okay. I say that very specifically because crisis generally leads to a different way of thinking and different way of operations, and that creates new opportunities. So I've experienced the financial crisis in 1987, the internet boom and bubble and burst in the turn of the century, and then obviously the financial crisis in 2008. So in 2008, I was working as a director for a financial services company called Merrill Lynch. And while Bear Stearns and other Lehman Brothers were all, dropping out of the face of Earth, we got a call on Sunday, September 14th. That is, I'll never forget that. So we were asked to get on an emergency call at 10 o'clock, and we all got on the call, and then we were told that basically Merrill Lynch is not going to exist anymore because we are being bought out by Bank of America. Right, so Merrill Lynch was a flagship Wall Street firm, and overnight it just disappeared. So that tells you how some of these crises can actually change the complexion of business and what it can do in terms of creating new opportunities. So what happened then at the end of the crisis was that there was explosion of new companies coming into play. I'm sure that you're familiar with Airbnb and Uber, and there are other counterparts like Lyft and Ola and Oyo. All these different, Paytm, for example, all these different companies came into being at the outset of these financial crises. So it could be around 2008 to 2010 is when all these different companies started sprouting up, right? And they have evolved, and some of them have become unicorns. But there are so many different companies out there that you may not be aware of, but they're still playing a very important role in our day-to-day life. Okay. So more recently, if you think about in India, in 2016. with the demonetization, overnight, the 500 and 1,000 rupee note went out of circulation, and people were forced to use digital payment techniques. So companies like Paytm and PhonePe, they came into prominence, even though they were in existence from a while back, and people were using it somewhat marginally. Then it became pretty strong after that. So the three questions that I wanted to address in today's conversation. Number one is, what is FinTech and how has it evolved over a period of time and how has it impacted us? So that's the first question. The second question that I would like to address is, what does it mean in terms of growth and how is the impact going to be over the next 5-10 years time, and how is that going to change our behavior, consumer behavior? And the third thing, probably most importantly, what does it mean for you as a student or a potential college, student, in terms of what does it mean to you in terms of how do you position yourself, right? Because you have to think about yourself not just for the next 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, but if you think about it in a more broad time scale, what does it mean to you? So let me start with the first question in terms of what is FinTech, right? And how has it evolved over a period of time? FinTech is nothing magical. It's fairly straightforward. It's a combination of the two words finance and technology, as probably some of you have already read it. So finance and technology became FinTech, right? So it is an easy way for you to connect with the types of technology that is being used, that companies are using to make the financial services process more efficient. That's to it, right? And typically, when you think of FinTech, you associate that with startups, right? Startups founded and for the purpose of disrupting the current financial systems and corporations that rely more on the back-end processes and stuff like that, while these FinTech firms rely more on technology to drive those same processes, right? And I will touch on some of the examples of that. So while we think of startups as equivalent of FinTechs, but many of the big banks and institutions like LIC, the State Bank of India, Punjab National Bank, HDFC, banks that you're probably familiar with, they have a fairly significant program in the back end to promote and leverage these new emerging technologies in their day-to-day operations. So the startup companies are actually going to be competing with these big companies, and the decision and the judgment call in terms of how that is going to play out in the future is still up in the air. But the big banks are going to get a run for their money, if nothing else. It's happening in all over the world. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in the US, and it's going to happen in India as well, right? So and the government is also looking at this more seriously, right? So across the globe, it is not just in India, but for example, RBI is saying that they want to encourage more of the electronic payment process across the different sections of society, and make it less cash society. And I'm deliberately using the less cash society rather than a cashless society, because they want to make sure that the paper circulation of rupee notes, they reduce, and people are using the digital payments and techniques for that. And so the underlying technology is FinTech. Similarly, when the Brexit was being discussed, when the UK was supposed to get out of the European Union, FinTech hub is actually sitting in London. By the Canary Wharf and other areas around London is where the FinTech hub is. And so when Brexit was being discussed, the big thing that was being discussed and being debated was, what does it mean in terms of when UK comes out of European Union, right? And what happens to all the money transfers that is being handled by these FinTech companies? What happens to all the data that is being consumed or located by these FinTech companies? So there's a lot of issues around that, right? So all different governments are dealing with these fintech and emergence of these new technologies in different ways, and so it is still to be seen as to what the final outcome is going to be, but it is being taken very seriously. Need to understand that the fintech actually did not start in the last 4 years or 5 years. It has been around for the last 40, 50 years in different forms and shapes. So in the 60s and 70s, the information technology and then some synonymously computers started making its appearance in financial institutions. So if you ask your grandparent or your parents in terms of how they dealt with money, right? So your parents may say that probably in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they used to go to a branch, fill out some forms to hand over the cash, and so that it can be deposited into the account, or vice versa, pull money out, or fill other forms to transfer money from one account to the other. That's the typical transaction that used to happen, right? Then with the advent of ATMs, that started changing. People used to go and use the ATMs to pull money, made the process a little simpler and easier. That's again technology within the financial services. Now, if I ask you, or if I ask my children, they're probably never ever stepped into a bank branch, right? Most of your operations are going to be done using your smartphone, whether it is money transfer, whether it is paying your vendor, your sabji wala, your doodh wala, and everybody else. How do you pay is typically going to be using Paytm or some other forms of electronic payments, right? So the world of finance and transaction processing and the way of dealing with each other is changing, right? So there are person-to-person or peer-to-peer type of payment processing is available now. So you don't deal with cash as much, so you deal with other things. So it has evolved over a period of time, and it will continue to evolve, right? So there is nothing magical that is happening here, but one needs to recognize that the world of finance, the world of commerce and business is changing because of these underlying fintech, and it is accelerated in the last 10 years quite a bit, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. So what do these startups or these companies do as fintech companies, right? So the fintech companies primarily do focus on different new segments, right? Number one, they focus on the population of the unbanked, right? When I use the word unbanked, it means so if you think of rural India, right? When the farmers and the agriculturists, they practically never had a bank account, right? And so that is changing quite a bit, right? So now they are able to transact business through their phones, and the fintech companies are actually supporting those kind of capabilities. That's number one. The second is for these startup companies are actually targeting people who are more sophisticated. So they want dealing with people who are currency transactions or FX trading, but they want to do it at a much lower cost, more sophisticated users, if you will, right? Then the companies, the startup companies that are focused on wealth management and being able to protect and grow your investments, right? So through use of mutual funds or other financial instruments, right? So these startup companies are targeting many of those traditional banks and traditional companies to provide services in the wealth management space that is more sophisticated, but that is at a fraction of a cost, and that is self-serving, right? So people don't have to depend on your financial advisor. You can do it yourself. They provide you advice. So there is a lot of sophistication that has been brought in. In the future, people are talking about cryptocurrencies and virtual wallets, and the ability to do trade in bitcoins. All those are part of your more futuristic, if you will, capabilities of fintech, right? So while the use of these cryptocurrencies are gaining popularity in some sections of society and in some parts of the world, it has not been fully accepted by everyone, right? So for example, the Supreme Court and the RBI finally, through Supreme Court diktats and RBI, finally relaxed the use of cryptos and exchanges in India a couple of weeks back, or probably a month back, right? So in India, it is kind of changing. There are still certain regulations and legal restrictions in terms of how it can be done. Switzerland, for example, on the other hand, have been absolutely adopting this whole world of cryptos in a much more aggressive fashion. There are hubs in Singapore and Dubai and other places that is doing a lot of experimentation in terms of use of these blockchain technologies and cryptos in a more methodical and structured fashion, right? So what are the drivers that is making this happen? I would say there are probably 3 or 4 reasons, especially in India. Number one is the highest penetration of smartphones. So almost everyone has got a smartphone now. 1.2 million mobile subscribers are there in India, and the increasing growing disposable income is adding to that. The middle class expansion. By 2030, expect that India will add another 140 million and 21 more million high income households to the populace, right? And that is going to generate more demand and more growth. So that's on the socio-demographic standpoint. But on the other side, from the government policy side, there is the widespread adoption of Aadhaar now, right? And so that formalization of those enrollments with 1.2 billion enrollments, and then the penetration through the Jan Dhan Yojana that has been created by this government, that has created a bunch of bank accounts, albeit through mobile banking. It has kind of use of these smart technologies has actually gone up quite a bit. So see, on the confluence of government, startup companies, and the consumer demand all coming together, which is driving the adoption of FinTech. So that brings me to the second question. So what is the growth and how is it going to impact the future, right? So according to Invest India, India has the highest FinTech adoption rate across the globe. Okay, full stop. So it's the adoption rate in India is about 87%. In China, it is about 52%. So it is pretty phenomenal that India has adopted this in a very aggressive way, right? And is the fastest growing as it relates to that. There is a growth of about 23%, compounded annual growth rate. Investments are continuing to flood in. Maybe during the next 3-4 months, it's going to probably trickle in. There is $140 billion through 2023 is what is anticipated just for FinTech companies. The digital payments through the UPI is gone to about $15 billion through 2018. So there is a lot of different data points that dictate or that indicate that FinTech is growing and it is here to stay. Statista they indicated that in 2020, as of probably January, February, there were close to 2,000 companies in the payments, lending, wealth technology, regulatory technology world in the FinTech startup space, right? So there are several companies that you may not have heard of. There are some companies you may have heard of, like Paytm, PhonePe, Policy Bazaar, Lending Card, M-Swipe, a bunch of them. You may have BillDesk. You may have heard of some of these, Moviquick. So some of these companies you may have heard of, but there are about 2,000 companies playing in this space. So there is a tremendous amount of opportunities for companies to grow, find a niche that they will work for them, and provide better customer service to consumers. Yeah, so that is definitely happening. So what are they providing? What do these startup companies providing to us as consumers, right? What they're focusing on is providing specialized solutions, right? Be it in terms of easier to transact business, easier to lend money or borrow money from different people. So that's how it is done. So and they're getting into very niche areas as well, right? So let me give you a couple of examples. Now there are insurance companies who are offering micro insurance, right? Micro insurance means things specific to a particular area, right? It could be geographical area or specialized area of insurance. So there is a company that offers mosquito insurance, right? So mosquito insurance is basically to ward or insurance against or protection against any ailments caused by mosquito bites. Okay, and the premium is fairly affordable. So if you want to get a mosquito insurance, you can buy mosquito insurance, right? So if you think about this in the context of what we are facing right now, sometime in the future, I'm sure that the insurance companies are going to, or especially the fintech startups are going to think of opportunities to tap on, coronavirus type of insurance, right? And some people may be buying it, so it's an opportunity, right? So I'm just saying that these are the opportunities that are available, and typically the startup companies, or especially in the fintech world, are the ones that are going to tap onto these, specific opportunities. Having said that, I'll give you another example, which is slightly different. It's not about startup. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Big Basket and Amazon, that delivers essential goods to us, right? Whether it is by milk or other types of perishable or eatable items, we can order, and the groceries, vegetables and fruits, they deliver it to us, right? Especially in this during this pandemic time. What has also happened is this Bangalore Civic Corporation, Bangalore Mahanigam Palika, that BBMP, some of you may be familiar with that. What they have done is they have created an online alternate to those online grocery firms, right? And they have assembled merchants, the logistic companies, the drivers, partner companies like Dunzo and Shadowfax and other HouseJoy. So they have assembled these different set of ecosystem in the set to ensure that they can specifically focus on these COVID hotspots in and around Bangalore, right? So they have signed up about 16,000 merchants. They received in the first 2 days of operation, they received about 10,000 orders. Okay, so basically what it did was it allowed people to stay at home during this lockdown, and the Bangalore Municipal Corporation was able to, or BBMP Palika, they were able to deliver whatever you need to their house, right? So because BBMP knew they had arm of the government, they knew where people are living, so they were able to produce that to the customers in a very quick way, right? So, and what is the platform they're running it on? They're running it on WhatsApp. And then you would have heard the news yesterday that WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, had put a stake in Reliance Jio, right? So now you see that the big companies who are interested in these kind of non-traditional mechanisms are getting in and investing $5.6 billion or whatever it is into Reliance Jio to tap onto the digital payment, customer data, and the merchandising and retailing, e-retailing platform. So there's tremendous interest in India because of the size and the growing middle class, right? So clearly there is what point I'm trying to make here is that number two is that there is the impact that fintech is making in today's business is sustainable and over a long period of time, right? And you may still find these startup companies able to get some money from this, from venture capitalists and other angel investors, especially targeting tier 2, tier 3 cities. So there may be a little bit of lull in activity in other areas, but at least in tier 2, tier 3 cities, I believe that there is going to be a good amount of activity in the fintech world. Okay? So that brings me to the third question: what should you do? I'm sure that some of you, maybe commerce graduates, some of you may be science graduates, some of you may be doing other areas of learning. That is all right. So there is a lot of research and work done on in terms of by World Economic Forum and other EY studies, which say tells you what the futures of skills are going to be. Right? You will have heard of the word future of work, right? So I will tell you three things. Number one is that keep yourself abreast of what is happening in the market, right? Especially as it relates to the business and economy and finance and technology, and because that is actually going to help you in terms of foolproofing your future, right? So read trade magazines, read books, read newspaper articles, blogs, etc. Right? That's number one. It's an easy thing. The second thing, probably many of you are at that cusp of graduating from high school and getting into college for your bachelor's program, and depending on where you are, what you need to be looking at is, as you selecting your colleges or the institution where you want to study, you probably will be looking at. You should consider the option of an institution that is going to provide you holistic education, be it in terms of critical thinking, lateral, ability to think creatively, ability to do team building activities, and building on your emotional intelligence. I think that's what is going to get you to a point where you will be future proof, right? So you want an institution that provides you a global perspective and experience, engages you to stretch your imagination in many ways, right? And be able to connect the dots between what is finance and what is economics and what is government policy. So if you say that I'm a FinTech startup or I'm going to get into to a specific type of business or startup, how does it, what are the legal implications of that? What are the regulatory implications? What are the government policies? How can I take advantage of those government policies, right? So one has to think about the different aspects of finance and business and commerce in a more holistic way. And you need to ensure that the institution provides that, right? So that is in addition to the teaching you the fundamentals and methods and techniques of learning, right? So that's what it is. So especially, if you are a commerce graduate and you wanted to join a BCom program, you need to make sure that the whole traditional way of BCom is being looked at in a different way and look at it in a more holistic fashion, right? Third and most important for you is that as you start your college career, look beyond your 3 years in college, right? Focus on all the opportunities that you're going to have for your future skills, right? Keep a 5 to 10 year vision and horizon as you plan your classes and plan your degree program, so that you can be a more meaningful and productive citizen, right? Whether you're working as in the corporate sector, whether you're working in your own, running your own startup or running your family business, or whether you are an administrator at a government institution or as a professional in a think tank, right? So you just need to make sure that you're thinking long term rather than just in a tactical way, right? So that's very important. So to summarize, I think I'm running out of time here. So to summarize, I'll tell you these 4 things, right? Number one of my gurus, David Schreier, who was at MIT before and then joined Oxford, he said FinTech revolution is capable of building a better infrastructure in finance, predicting future financial events, and shifting consumer behavior and bank unbanked. So it kind of summarizes the entire story of FinTech. So takeaways are, number one, there is tremendous growth in the areas of FinTech, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and we are at the early stages of development at this stage. Number two, the future of jobs will involve some form of dealing with these exponential technologies, so don't shy away from them, embrace them. And finally, remember that crisis creates opportunities, so grab it with both hands and legs, okay? So that's what I have for now, and I think I may have extended my time by a few minutes, so I will jump to questions. So I have received the questions. So question 1 from Suryaveer Bandari, please tell some success stories of FinTech as a business and how it is relevant to startup. So the classic example of FinTech startup would be, I will say, Paytm. If you are familiar with that, even though it is undergoing some little bit of turbulence right now, that is because government is coming in with their Beam platform and other companies are giving a run for the money. Paytm is actually a pretty tremendous success story. It was initially funded by the Chinese firms, Alibaba and others, right? But it has started operating on its own, and it has made significant success in the last in the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years in India, right? And it will continue to grow. They have branched out into, Paytm Money and bank and other areas. And the reason they are able to do that is primarily because of the fact that the people recognize Paytm, right? They did appropriate branding and marketing, and so they were able to uh, take advantage of the situation in 2016. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other companies as well, Rupee and others that are, making a significant impact. Second question, also from, so it looks like Suryavir Bandari is Bandare, sorry, is it Bandari or Bandari? Yeah, Suryavir Bandari has a bunch of questions, so let me address each of them. How FinTech and AI ML technology are interrelated? Blockchain FinTech is a small microfinance. If a small microfinance wants to use this technology, how will they use it? And then the third question from him is, it is said that it's used for money laundering. So what's the scope of cybersecurity and it works in a technical way? So it clearly seems like you are educated FinTech, either consumer or you read about it, which is great. So all these are interrelated, right? So either in terms of, I assume that when you use the word AI ML, I assume you're talking about AML. Or is it you're talking about AI and ML? I'm not sure. So AI and ML are machine learning and AI technologies. If you're talking about AML, which is anti-money laundering, so it kind of deals with your next question. So I'll touch on both of them, right? So any of these fintech companies relies on some backend technologies and services, right? And those backend technologies and services are related to data. So data is the new oil, if you will. If you have heard the phrase, it says data is the new oil. Or data is king. People use data to either expand their business or to ensure that their competition doesn't take over there, or identify new opportunities. So data is king. So so you want to make sure at the back end you have sufficient amount of data to play with it. And when you're talking about data, it automatically leads to the question of how do you use the data, right? And if you have got vast amounts of data, so for example, if there is 1.2 billion customer information or biometric information in India on Aadhaar, how can that data be used, right? So you have to apply some different types and techniques of technology to process that data and identify nuggets of information, right? And similarly, if you think about Facebook, if you think about Amazon, they mine your data. It's called data mining. They mine your data to understand, develop patterns of behavior. So if you buy, so for a simple example is Netflix. Many of you are using Netflix now. So if you have watched a certain type of movie, it will start recommending another type of movie, right? Similar to that. And how does it do that? It recognizes certain patterns, saying that, okay, you are from this locality and you've watched this movie, and so I will recommend movies just of similar nature where other people have also seen it, right? Amazon does the same thing. If you buy one book, it will recommend a bunch of other books related to that, right? So there it uses what is called as artificial intelligence, and that the programming that they use to get these types of nuggets of information is machine learning, right? So that's how that is covered. The second part of that is around money laundering, right? So there's a lot of different things that you talked about, money laundering and cybersecurity. If you wanted to know more about it, how it is all operating in a technical way, I think you need to come attend some of my classes, which I can talk to you about in terms of how these things all come together. Because anti-money laundering is actually actually a separate course in and of itself. It comes in the constructs in terms of managing risks for financial firms. It's not, when I use the word financial firms, not big banks and big institutions, but also smaller companies as well. When you're doing microfinance, what you want to do is, government has got very strict regulations in terms of how the money is being used. So if you go to the dark web and use it for other nefarious purposes, obviously, and doing hawala transactions or other types of things, you are actually laundering money. And the laundering money is actually a technical process. So there are very specified and defined ways how money is being moved from point A to point B to C to D, and how their identity is obfuscated, that is hidden. And so it's actually a very technical process. And there are technologies that can detect. So this, for example, artificial intelligence can detect if there are certain patterns it finds, and then flag them as AML, or flag them as risky transactions, right? And banks use them all the time. I have been involved in some of these programs at Citibank and at JP Morgan Chase as well. So it is a fairly rigorous and sophisticated program that runs in the back. All right, so for less cash society, what is the scope of bitcoins and stable coins? I think we are not there as of now. So that let me make it really brief. Whether it can be used for a less cash society, we could, but we don't have to. I mean, they are kind of independent. We don't necessarily have to use any kind of cryptocurrency to create a less cash society. Every merchant, every trader actually starts using these, whatever is a legal tender right now. It is the Indian rupee in the case of India, US dollars in the case of the US, and Japanese yen in the case of Japan. If they continue to use, people start continuing to use these, digital payments for transacting business. Or if I wanted to send you money, I can do a Venmo and send it across, right? So I don't need anything else for that. I don't need to create a crypto for that. So that's a more different level of sophistication for, and it serves a very different purpose altogether. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. Sanav Anand is asking, how can a college student do something innovative in this field of financial technology? What can you do something innovative? Okay, it's a loaded question. I will say it's a smart question. You can do something innovative first by understanding what it means to be in this field. Number one. Number two is understanding the nuances of what the existing businesses are, so that you can create something innovative. Again, it can be change in processes, change in product offerings, change in type of customer service. So innovation takes a whole wide spectrum, right? Innovation is not about just new product or new type of service. It could be, something that people are not thinking about or offering right now. It could be that. It could be from a geographical standpoint, product and service standpoint. It could be a pricing standpoint. There are, in terms of price bundling standpoint, there are different techniques of innovation and methods of innovation. So the first thing I would suggest is to get a better handle in terms of what this financial technologies mean, and then you can focus on a specific area and say, okay, I wanted to talk about wealth management, or I want to talk about insurance technology. I want to talk about lending and payments. I want to create a marketplace for crowdfunding, right? So there are different application areas, and you can say what exists today and what is it that you can do to solve people's problems. Ultimately, the innovation has to result in either directly or indirectly solving people's problems or making life a little simpler, right? When I use the word people, it could also be corporations. It could also be end customers like you and me. But that's the process you need to go through. So there is no magic bullet to say, here is what you can do to make it create an innovative this field. Okay. The next question is, how can an NGO raise funds via FinTech? Interesting. So NGOs, especially in the last 4 or 5 years in India, have faced a lot of challenges because the restrictions and regulations have increased quite a bit. But I'll tell you how NGOs have been using some of these technologies across the globe, right? If you think about NGOs, the main constituents are the people that they are actually serving, right? It could be in a village, it could be a farmland, it could be other types of institutions that they're serving. So there is an end consumers for these NGOs. That's number one. That's the main purpose, right? The second constituent is all the government regulations and government agencies that come and oversee them, right? and so they need to figure out as to how to interact with them. The third is they had to raise funds. So whether it is through international development agencies or other types of agencies, they have to raise funds so that they can do their community projects, right? Um, so so to do that, they can apply technology either in terms of crowdfunding, right? So to do crowdfunding for a particular cause, they can actually, there are several platforms available for crowdfunding, right? And GoFundMe is a great example, right? So if there are specific things that people wanted to get, you can actually raise awareness within people and get funding for your cause, right? So that's one easy way to do that. The other ways are where they can actually do the connection across different agencies through a blockchain backbone, and so that the processing can be very simplified, made more efficient. They can create smart contracts to enable these processes to happen fairly rapidly, and so that's another way that they can NGOs can leverage that. So I'm giving you a few examples in terms of how they can do that through crowdfunding, through more efficient payment processing, through creating blockchain mechanism for using smart contracts across different agencies, so you don't have to go write applications to the government for in triplicate and get approval. It is all routed through blockchain process, right? So that is how they can do it. Will payment gateway replace MasterCard and Visa? Potentially, yes. I think that's the next question. I think it is also from Sano. I'm not sure. It is very possible that they could replace, because if I think about what my son and daughter do, if they have to, when they are, if they go to a restaurant, right, if they're with their friends, they don't necessarily use Visa or MasterCard, right? They use other forms of digital payments and use other gateways, and there are several gateways sprouting up in India as well. And so they don't necessarily use a credit card. So, but what is also happening is the same MasterCard, Visa, American Express, they're building a different type of payment techniques in the backend, right? So they are making it more easier for their customers to switch over from the typical traditional credit cards and debit cards to digital payment gateways. So they are also transforming themselves. That's why I said fintech companies are going to give a run for the money for the traditional financial institutions, and that's one way to do that. Okay. Priya Kakar, what opportunities does fintech offer in terms of developing a truly single digital financial services market? Truly single digital financial services market. I don't know whether there will be a single digital financial services market. You have these multi-utility banks right now that offer certain things, but I don't think it is too broad a field for any one institution. I'm not calling it banks, any one institution to offer all different types of services. I think there is enough plurality in terms of the type of services you want. So what agriculture or farmer may actually want in terms of financial services may be very different than what a trader may look for in terms of letter of credit and so on and so forth, which will be very different than what a micro or a small enterprise owner may want than typical middle class employee may look for in terms of financial services. So I think it is fairly widespread in terms of the how you're going to use money and finance. So I think the demand will be very different. So I think there will be, I don't think you'll be able to create one financial services organization, but you could potentially combine many of these things into a loosely strung platform, a marketplace, if you will, to offer different services. And there are there's coming together. So this whole concept of co-opetition, I don't know whether you heard of that. So co-opetition is competition plus cooperation. So rival companies coming together to provide services that they may not offer otherwise, right? So that they are pulling their, they may compete with each other in certain segments, but then they come together to offer in different segments. So classic example, not in the fintech sector, is Samsung and Apple, right? Even though they compete with each other in terms of selling cell phones to you, but in the back end, they cooperate with each other as it relates to the glass, the Gorilla Glass manufacturing or other types of things, right? So there is cooperation between them. So, and it is runs into several, hundreds of millions of dollars of competition. Okay. Then Achyut is asking, how will AI affect employment in India? I'm not going to read between the lines there. How will AI affect employment in India? AI is going to increase employment in India. So it's very counterintuitive. Typically, when you think of artificial intelligence being able to run things, the machine is going to run all the work, or robotics is going to take over the manufacturing. Robotics uses AI as well. You will find that actually it is not so. So I'll give you a classic example of why I'm saying that. If you go back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? In Japan, when car manufacturing companies and other heavy industry manufacturing companies started introducing robots, the employees felt that their job is at stake, right? Likewise, in India, in the early 80s and late 70s, when computers were being introduced, I would say early to mid 80s, when computers were being introduced in banks, the employees, the officers, and the staff, they went on protest, right, indicating that it is going, this is going to take away their jobs. But what really happened was their job skills got enhanced. The number of jobs got increased tremendously because the kind of job people were doing before in terms of writing manually in a double ledger book or making notations of journal entries, all that became automated and digitized. And so people had more time to do other types of work, A. B, they could service more customers, so more customers started coming in, and people's quality of life improved quite a bit, right? So, so the employment went up, and the quality of life of individuals, both as an employee as well as consumers, that went up. So similar thing is going to happen with AI as well. There is going to be a significant increase of employment in India, but the type of jobs is going to be different, right? So what was done traditionally in terms of decision making by managers or by analysts, that is going to change. They're going to be armed with a lot more data sets, the patterns, so they can make decisions. So the planning process will be different. The way they, people execute their jobs will be different. So the roles will be very different, right? So if you think about AI in a more broader sense, and if you think of drones, right? Many of you are familiar with drones, and drones are those flying objects in the sky, at a low height. That is can potentially do multiple things. They can be currently that it's being used in multiple locations for monitoring, where people are aggregating, right, in terms of so that the social distancing is being maintained. So they're using drones in multiple places. Now, who is operating the drones in the back end? If you think about it, is the people who are actually, there are drone operators, so different type of job, which was not existing 5 years back. People are not even thought about drones. But also more importantly, people who are actually going to be analyzing the data and providing that analysis to the regulators or the authorities so that they can take action, right? If you think about Punjab police, for example, they are using actually artificial intelligence in a very different way in terms of crowd control and crowd management and managing the issues with traffic, trafficking and so on and so forth. They are using the data sets to actually go hyper local, right, in terms of solving problems for crime and other things, right? So they're using AI in a very different way. and that's going to continue to happen. Okay, so it is the different type of skills, different type of opportunities to solve different problems, but much higher employment will be going to happen. The next question is cryptocurrency changing fintech? It's a chicken and egg situation. So is cryptocurrency driving fintech or fintech driving cryptocurrency? I think it, again, this is my personal view. I think it all started with, especially after the 2008 crisis, a bunch of people did not want to rely on banks and financial institutions. So they started creating a network between themselves so that they can transact in money or whatever the case may be, and they called it cryptocurrency, right? Virtual currencies. And so, but then they had to rely on a backbone, and that backbone was called as blockchain, right? Now, and that became the offshoot. So blockchain was resulted in cryptocurrencies, and the blockchain became the kind of the embodiment of any all types of financial technologies that came up, right? However, what also changed was that not all fintech companies need to rely on blockchain. So they also found other mechanisms, the traditional backbone and the infrastructure to run their new type of financial operations, right? So cryptocurrency may not change fintech, but there is a little bit of symbiosis between the two, and sometime in the future, that's why I said that some of the startup companies may get into that. There are few companies in India that deals with cryptocurrencies and crypto exchanges, and they use certain backbone that uses fintech technologies, right? So they are all kind of interrelated, but one doesn't necessarily drive the other. Okay. What are the jobs prospects after studying fintech? It depends on where you are coming from. The job prospects, I think, are tremendous. I mean, that's the word I would use. If you are a science major and a computer science major, you got different types of opportunities. And many of the banks in India, whether they are multinational banks or local banks, they want people who are well-versed in the technology, but also the business aspect of it, right? So if you, they want people who can understand these technologies and apply them to grow their business and make them risk-proof, right? So whether they're as analysts to understand the business aspects and the business operations, or how these fintech can change their business operations, or they could be programmers. If you are into programming, there are whole bunch of new type of jobs and positions available in that fintech space. If you are into the related fields like AI and blockchain, there is a from blockchain developer to designer to to business blockchain business analyst. There's a whole slew of different titles and roles that are available now. And I just looked at Naukri.com yesterday on a different for a different matter, and I found that there are like 2,200 open positions in the area of fintech, and this was just yesterday I saw. Okay, so there is tremendous opportunities, and it varies on depending on where you are coming from. Okay, what are the challenges faced by fintech firms in India, and which is your favorite fintech firm and why? Wow. I don't have favorites. Number one, I don't have a favorite credit card company. I don't have a favorite bank. I don't have a. I don't believe in that. I believe that I need to be vigilant. I need to be objective in terms of what kind of services I need, and whoever is offering a better service at a better price and value, I will go with them. Right, so I would say that there is a favorite fintech firm. There are a number of them. So it depends also in a different context, right? If I was an investor, what would I look at, right? So as an investor, my viewpoints and perspective will be very different than as a consumer of fintech firms, right? So it depends on what slant you have. So that's second part of your question. The first part was, what are the challenges faced by fintech firms in India? So if I were to equate fintech firms with startup companies, the traditional challenges faced by any startup company is what is faced by fintech startups as well, with some little bit of deviation. So the typical challenges are always around access to funds access to market, right? And the third thing could also be around too much regulations and policy changes and so on and so forth, right? So those are I would say the top three, and that is also typically faced by fintech firms. But having said that, I think fintech has a slight advantage over other types of startup companies. So the startup, if I was doing a startup on, let's say, green energy or something else, right, or genetically modified seeds and wanting to sell that, so that's different than a fintech company. The advantage of a fintech company is that India has recognized that there is a tremendous need to push the digital India agenda, and the digital India agenda includes the use of several financial services capabilities, whether it is in terms of the Bharat payment systems to pay individuals and traders, or whether it is a beam which is around the transactions. So there are different ways that the government is actually promoting that. That may be the challenge in terms of how fintechs firm have to traverse between what the government regulations are and the access to funding and so on and so forth. The next question is Sainav. What is your opinion on investment of Facebook in Reliance? Okay, so let me, that would be the last question. I will just wrap it up after this. So Mr. Batra, if you can just extend this for a few more minutes, that will be very helpful. So in terms of what is my opinion on investment of Facebook in Reliance? I think it is a win-win-win-win situation. So the reason I use 4 wins is because the first win is for Facebook. They get a little more access to the Indian market. Number 2, I think it increases the credibility for Reliance Jio, especially it is a very nascent, not a profit-making venture so far. So infusion of capital is always helpful for any firm, whether it is big or small. That is number 2. It is a win for consumers because it also allows for other forms of technologies to be more pervasively used, right? And Facebook, for all its ills and problems, they still have a solid, business strategy. They have a very good approach to providing customer services in different areas. So they will be able to apply some of their R&D might to the Indian market, so which is a good. And finally, I think the government and the regulators and others, this could be a good opportunity for them to look at what is the FDI, will look like in the next 12 to 18 months, and as they want to attract more of these foreign companies into India, and also wean away some of the supply chain problems that China was facing. And so from a government standpoint, it gives them a great opportunity to strategize themselves and become more competitive and become a potential destination for other large firms as well. So I think it is a win across all different areas. Okay, so that's all I have time now, and I wish you all the best and thank you so much. And if there are any questions, please do direct them, and we will try to respond offline. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.